In 1981, a teacher had an unusual habit. He never called his students by their real names. Instead, he assigned them labels based on their future potential. Potential murderer, he called, and Callum raised his hand. Potential burglar, another boy responded. Potential cannibal, Joshua hesitated before lifting his hand. The students found it strange, but amusing. A dark joke they played along with. But later that day, Callum approached Joshua with a smirk. "Come over for dinner," he said. "I've got something special planned." That evening, Joshua felt a strange mix of curiosity and unease about the meal, its taste unlike anything he'd had before. He quickly dismissed the feeling as they shared stories and laughter. But as he walked home, a growing dread lingered, long after the meal had ended. The next morning, as roll call began, the teacher went through the usual routine. "Potential burglar," Brian raised his hand. When the teacher reached Callum's name, he paused and simply said, "Callum." The teacher moved on. "Next one, Joshua," he said. Unbeknownst to Joshua, the night before, Callum had followed a homeless man into a secluded area, lured him in with the promise of help, and ended his life. Callum dismembered the body and brought the parts home. The boys were now not just potentials, but a real cannibal and murderer.
What would happen if you stuck your head inside a particle accelerator? Well, in 1978, Anatoly Borgorsky was working on the largest particle accelerator in the Soviet Union. When he went to check on a piece of malfunctioning equipment, he saw a flash brighter than 1,000 suns. Though he hadn't felt any pain, a high-energy proton beam had passed through his brain. Instead of seeking help, he just finished his work and went home, until the next day when half of his face was swollen beyond recognition and he was sent to a clinic. Since he received 600 times the lethal dose of radiation, doctors were waiting for him to die. But he survived. With the left half of his face paralyzed, he went on to complete his PhD, continued working as a particle physicist, and is still alive today.
The unsolved case of the serial killer, the alphabet killer, who chose his victims because of their names and was never caught. One thing that really scares me is uncaught serial killers, so I'm going to tell you about one of them. This case all takes place in Rochester, New York. The first victim was a 10-year-old girl named Carmen Colon, who vanished on November 16, 1971 after never returning home from running some errands at the pharmacy. She was seen getting into a car that was parked near the pharmacy, and then only an hour later, 10-year-old Carmen was seen running on the side of the nearby interstate. She was just running alongside of the highway, and she's being chased by a dark brown car. It's chasing her, and Carmen's not wearing anything from the waist down, but she's frantically waving her arms and screaming for help from all the other cars that are also driving on the highway. The car that was chasing Carmen was able to catch up to her and throw her back inside of their car. And although dozens of cars witnessed this kidnapping, not a single one of them stopped to help Carmen. And then only 2 days later, Carmen's body was found. She had been essayed, her skull had been fractured, and she had been strangled. And then about a year and a half later, on April 2nd, 1973, 11-year-old Wanda Wakovich also vanished while running errands. And then tragically, only the next morning, the body of 11-year-old Wanda was found. She had also been essayed and strangled. There was male DNA on her body, as well as several strands of white cat fur, and no one that Wanda knew had a pet of that color. And then about 7 months after that, the last confirmed victim, 11-year-old Michelle Menza, also vanished when she never returned home from school. And then 2 days later, Michelle's body was also found, and like the first two victims, she had also been essayed and strangled, but like the previous victim, Wanda, she also had the exact same male DNA on her, as well as the exact same white cat fur. This positively linked Michelle and Wanda to the same killer, but all three girls are believed to be victims from the same serial killer. Because they were all girls around the same age, they all vanished from Rochester, New York, they all disappeared under similar circumstances, and all their lives were taken with the same MO. But there's one more puzzling detail that links all three of these victims together, and that's that the first and last name of each of these girls began with the same letter. Carmen Colon, Wanda Wakovich, Michelle Menza. Some skeptics think that that's a coincidence, but there's one more detail that kind of makes it seem like that was an intentional decision by the serial killer. And that is, although each girl was kidnapped in Rochester, New York, each girl's body was found in a neighboring town that matched their names. Carmen Colon was found in Churchville, Wanda Wakovich was found in Webster. Michelle Mainza was found in Macedon. And this is why this uncaught serial killer is known as the Alphabet Killer. I really want to know if you guys think this is a weird coincidence or if this was an intentional decision that was done by the serial killer, and if so, why? And also, how would he know their names when he kidnapped them? And although over the decades, this case has had many theories and many suspects, to this day, this case remains unsolved and the Alphabet Killer remains uncaught. And if you're interested in learning more about this case or more about uncaught serial killers, watch the last week's episode of Hot on the Case. You can find it anywhere. Also, right here. You can find it right here. Just click right there and you guys can watch it. Hot on the Case is my true crime show. We talk all things true crime with a focus on the unsolved and unexplained. So if you're interested in this case, definitely go check that out and you can learn more about this case from last week's episode. If you guys have already seen Hot on the Case, let me know in the comments. Let me know what you think about it. While you're there, let me know all your theories on this case and what case you want to see me cover next here, as well as on Hot on the Case. And until then, I will see you guys tomorrow with another video.
I can't actually believe what I'm hearing about adolescence on Netflix. This is probably going to come across as a rant, so I do really apologise in advance. So I've seen so many people comment about how they felt disappointed by the series because at the start they thought there was going to be more to it and they were going to find out who the real killer was. That's the entire point. You were meant to feel like at first you didn't believe he was the killer. Is it not actually so much more powerful when you realise that you've had the wool pulled over your eyes and you couldn't initially believe that these young boys would do something so horrific? And the way Jamie just seemingly had like a nice normal upbringing and a normal family. That's what literally made it such a powerful watch for me. It just shows the kind of hatred and misogyny that goes on social media can literally penetrate any household. The victim blaming was illustrated really well as well, I felt. The way that people will look for any tiny possible reason why a female is to blame for the way the male acts. There was also really good subtle moments that kind of brought the social message forward, like with the security guard just kind of like watching over the psychologist and just making her feel uncomfortable. Also the way that the female police officer was just kind of subtly disregarded as well. Me and my friend actually had a situation in a car park the other month and I feel like I haven't really told anybody about it, but we were essentially sat in her car and these two men pulled up in a white van and me and her were just kind of sat chatting in the front of the car, and these men just started to try and get our attention by shouting, waving, and we just ignored them. They then persisted and it was almost like they were angry that we were trying to ignore them. So they just started blowing the horn very loudly, repeatedly, over and over and over and over again. They were shouting through the window. They were just making us so uncomfortable and we just continued to try and pretend that they didn't exist. The sad thing was in that moment, I thought, right, do I start filming them to A, try and deter them from what they were doing, and B, also try and get some kind of evidence and so that I could show people, maybe even report it to the police. But I actually didn't film. I pressed the record button on my phone and then I stopped myself because I was actually afraid in that moment that if we started filming and they saw, they could do something really scary, like they could get out of their car, they could literally come and attack us. This was in broad daylight in the middle of a busy retail park as well. Like, it's actually terrifying. This was not one man on his own, this was two men egging each other on. Honestly, I don't even think we really gave it too much thought afterwards. Like, we were a bit shaken up at the time, but we just drove off. And I think we didn't really tell anybody because it is so normalized, and unfortunately you're just sort of told that it's like part of being female, that you just have to accept that kind of behavior. So if you're one of those people saying that you felt adolescence was boring, maybe you are part of the problem.
The scariest motel in America is located near an abandoned graveyard and is filled with thousands of clowns. It was opened in Tonopah, Nevada in 1985 by Leroy and Leona David to honor their late father, whose collection of over 150 clown statues was used to decorate the property, though now it has over 2,000 pieces of clown memorabilia. To make it creepier, the 31-room clown motel sits directly next to the Tonopah Cemetery, and it's rumored to be haunted with reports of orbs, disembodied voices, and the clowns moving on their own.
So who do you call when it's the police that are committing the mass murder? This case is absolutely infuriating and will give you trust issues. It's got everything: kidnapping, mass murder, catfishing, home invasion. Please don't say I didn't warn you. It was November 2022 in Virginia. Austin Edwards was a 28-year-old and he was interested in a job as a Washington County deputy sheriff. So he went the normal route. He put in the application, submitted the references, etc. He had previously worked for the police, he was keen to progress in his career, and he successfully got the job and was super happy, obviously. This was on the 16th of November. 10 days later, he would commit mass murder. Because Austin should never have been employed as a deputy sheriff. He had a history of threatening and violent behaviour, and the police department would have found this out if the proper checks had been correctly done. In fact, one of the references Austin had put down on his application was his own dad, and the other two were apparently uncontactable. He previously worked for the Virginia State Police, but when the Washington County Sheriff's Office contacted them about him, the Virginia State Police said they weren't comfortable to discuss his history. He previously had psychiatric problems, had threatened to unalive himself and his father, but apparently clerical errors failed to highlight this and he was employed. He was given a police badge and a revolver due to this successful employment, and he would go on to commit arson, kidnapping and murder. Meanwhile, Austin hadn't only been catfishing on his police application, he'd also been catfishing a literal child online. The girl was 15 and we will refer to her in this case as RKW. The pair initially began chatting online as Austin was posing as a 17-year-old guy and reached out to the girl on Instagram. RKW lived at home with her sister, her mum Brooke, her granddad Mark and her nan Sharon. They were a lovely family unit. And RKW and Austin began chatting quite a lot, and he was pretty much love bombing her, to be honest. He would send her really lengthy voice notes, he would also send her gifts, pay for her Uber Eats and essentially groom her. The behaviour of Austin, or his online alias, really started to concern RKW just after Halloween that year. Austin was becoming really clingy and pushy too. He was trying to get her to send pictures of herself to him. She really recognised this was a red flag and actually blocked him on Instagram, but he was not happy to just leave things there. Emailed her an S note, which is just so abusive and manipulative, and things would get much, much worse. On November the 23rd, he began a 2-day driving trip from his home in Virginia to the girl's house in California. And as a side note, I have previously talked online about my experience with a stalker, and a lot of people did say to me at the time, why didn't you just block him? But my reasoning was almost like, I'd rather know what he's saying to me and have an awareness of what's going on if he's going to show up at my house or at my work, rather than just block him and not know. And I'm not saying this girl did anything wrong in any way, shape or form. I mean, we're always told, aren't we, to just block people, but I'm just stating my reasoning of why I actually decided not to block this person. So back to the story. On the 25th, Austin showed up to her family home. He used his police badge to gain entry, and at 9:42 a.m. Sharon the nan called Michelle, Brooke's sister, from the house. So this is a little bit confusing, but just stay with it. Austin had basically showed up at the family home with his police badge, saying that he needed to talk to them about the safety of RKW, the girl. And RKW wasn't at the house at this time. She was actually off in the car, and this call that was made, Sharon said a detective was there to speak to them about some indecent photos that RKW had been sending. Now, we know this was a lie. This was just Austin using his power, his badge, to be let into the family home and basically making something up about RKW that he needed to speak to the adults about. So there was some discussion with family members about what was going on, and Brooke was out with her daughter RKW at the time. Now, upon hearing what was going on, she drove back to the family home and told the girl, RKW, to wait in the car. I presume she probably wanted to speak to this detective without the girl there, just to scope out what was going on. She probably didn't want to embarrass her daughter or scare her. So the girl sat in the car and waited for ages, and nobody came back out. She decided after a little while to actually go inside the house and see what was going on. When she reached the door, she had a horrific shock. A man grabbed her by her hair and yanked her into the house. Now, she didn't recognise this man at first, but this was obviously Austin, but she never knew what Austin actually looked like. She could see her nan, granddad and mum on the floor, and horrifically, they were lying face down with bags over their heads that were taped at the neck. Their arms and legs were also bound with duct tape. Girl obviously screamed at this. She didn't know whether they were dead or alive. And she obviously had no idea that the man that had just grabbed her was Austin, who she'd been speaking to online. Austin held her at G-point and revealed his true identity. He grabbed her and pulled her around the house with a gas canister and set fire to all of the rooms one by one. But this wasn't over. He then dragged her into the back of his car. Luckily, a neighbour spotted him doing this and called 911, but when police arrived, it was far too late. The house was engulfed in flames, all the residents were deceased, and Austin had driven off with the little girl. Having kidnapped her, he was speeding across the country. He told her to pretend to be his daughter if anyone asked, and that he was going to take her back to Virginia, and he had to kill her family so that he was able to take her. She couldn't just flee this vehicle. He had his hand on his weapon at all times, and the terrified girl could also see he had a large knife that was covered in blood. Although he made stops occasionally to use the toilet, he kept a tight grip on her hand. Luckily, police were able to trace Austin, and a pursuit began. Austin told police through his radio that if they caught him, he'd unalive himself. Obviously, in order to make sure that they kept RKW safe, police knew they needed to tread very carefully. As they chased his car, Austin started shooting out of the back of the window. Now, this was terrifying for the girl, and suddenly the car started smoking. Now, she was in the back with one of those big gas canisters, so she was seriously fearing for her life. Was she going to catch on fire? Thankfully, Austin's car then became stuck on some rocks and the police caught up to him. The girl sprinted out of the car and Austin unalived himself before the police could apprehend him. The girl was saved but tragically lost all 3 of her precious family members in that house. Police believe Austin set the fire to the house after killing the victims to try and conceal evidence.
This doctor essayed over 300 of his patients and got away with it for over 20 years. This story will absolutely disgust you. Robert Haddon tries to excuse his crimes by blaming his traumatic childhood. He says his parents were neglectful and that his older brother SA'd him. He actually says that there was an inappropriate relationship between all 4 of his siblings. Robert got married and had 2 children. He had big dreams of becoming a doctor, which he did later do. He actually got a job as a doctor at the Columbia University Hospital in Manhattan, which is a very well-known and respected hospital. And he got a job as a doctor in the OBGYN department as a lady doctor. He began working in the late 80s, early 90s, and at first, Dr. Robert Haddon was very well liked and very popular with staff and patients alike. He was very friendly and gained the trust of all of his patients, but pretty much as soon as he started working as a doctor in this department, Robert Haddon began SAing his female patients. And he got away with it at first because Robert would only choose victims that were very young women, mostly underage girls who had never been to the lady doctor before and didn't know what it was supposed to be like. So Dr. Robert Haddon would tell these 15-year-old girls that the SA that they were experiencing was just a normal examination. And Dr. Robert Haddon was actually very manipulative. He was able to convince a lot of his patients to keep seeing him as a doctor even after they moved hours away, sometimes even when they moved out of state. And like most offenders, Dr. Robert Haddon would just escalate his crimes the longer he got away with them. The abuse started with inappropriate questions and inappropriate touching, and then he escalated to internal examinations when he was not wearing gloves. And because a lot of OBGYNs actually assist a lot of their patients when they're going through childbirth, Dr. Robert Haddon actually SA'd a lot of his patients while they were giving birth, teen moms and adults alike. And then Robert Haddon began to lick his patients down there during the examinations. And because the patients are lying on their back with their feet in stirrups, they can't see what's going on, but they could feel that something's wrong. And if they ever caught Robert and tried to report what happened to them to Columbia University, the university covered it up and ignored it for decades. And this was something that all of Robert's colleagues knew was going on, but they either looked the other way, pretend it wasn't happening, or they were also ignored when they tried to report it. There was actually one nurse who later came forward and said that she witnessed Dr. Robert Haddon SA over 100 of his patients in the span of 6 years. And that's just one nurse who witnessed it while she was in the room during the examinations, and most of these assaults happened when Robert was alone with his patients. He just kept getting away with it and getting away with it for so long. There was actually one of Robert's patients that he helped deliver her baby. That baby grew up, and when that baby was a teenage girl, she became a patient of Robert Haddon's, and then she became a victim of Robert Haddon's as well. And meanwhile, this entire time, Robert Haddon has a wife and 2 children. He actually has a teenage daughter for most of this time that's like the same age or even older than some of his victims. It's disgusting. It's despicable. And then in 2012, a woman named Lori Kenyuk became a patient of Robert's. She was 8 months pregnant, and at first, she really liked her Dr. Robert. And then very quickly, she began to identify some odd things that were happening during her examination. Like, she was pretty sure she heard her doctor moaning during the examination. And then there was another time during another examination where Lori felt something wet down there, so she like jerked up and went to go see what it was and realized that it was Robert's tongue. Lori begins freaking out. Her doctor, Robert, tries to explain himself, and Lori actually texts her boyfriend right then and there, "Dr. Haddon just licked my blank. I'm shaking and freaking out." Lori's boyfriend immediately comes to go get her, and he calls 911. And then later in the evening, when Robert hears that like Lori is freaking out and called 911, or her boyfriend called 911, he tries to call Lori, and she doesn't answer, obviously, because he just licked her. So he leaves her this voicemail. Take a listen.
"Hi, Lori, it's Dr. Haddon calling. It's like 4:30 on Friday. I just got word that you called the office and you're upset and that you were calling the police. What the heck happened? What's going on? Please, can we talk? If you can, please just give the office a call or come back and, talk face to face."
That very day, it was a Friday, Robert was arrested. The hospital and Columbia University were told that there was an investigation being done against Robert for essaying his patients. The very next day, Saturday, he was released on bail, and Columbia University immediately started letting Robert see patients again. They let him back to work immediately. He was arrested Friday, and by Tuesday, he was back seeing patients. He wasn't spooked at all. He was very confident, and he immediately just went back to essaying his patients. Columbia University actually got Robert a really expensive, nice lawyer and eventually allowed him to just quietly and respectfully retire. The DA in New York did not want to prosecute Robert because there wasn't enough evidence, so Lori took her story to the press, and even though she was only given a very small article on like page 10 in the local newspaper, dozens of victims ended up coming forward. So the district attorney was actually kind of like forced, I guess, to do something because what the district attorney did next was just a huge slap in the face. The DA offered Robert Haddon a plea deal. He would only need to plead guilty to 2 charges, one of which was a misdemeanor. He would need to surrender his medical license, which didn't even matter because he had already retired. He would also need to register as an SA offender, and in return, he was given 0 jail time. And he was given immunity from ever being able to be prosecuted for SA crimes in the state of New York. So pretty much he just got away with everything and was given immunity in the future. And then in 2020, 4 years after that plea deal, another victims of Robert Haddon's came forward publicly for the first time. And that woman was Evelyn Yang. She had previously come out with her story as an anonymous victim because she was seen as a public figure. Her husband was actually a hopeful presidential candidate. But in 2020, she was finally brave enough to come out with her story and publicly come out as a victim of Robert Haddon's. She did a huge interview on CNN, which made this story huge. And after that, hundreds of women came forward as victims of Robert Haddon with their stories. And this caught the attention of the Department of Justice, and they wanted to press charges against Robert, but remember, he had that plea deal where he was given immunity in the state of New York. So since he was unable to be prosecuted in New York, they had to come out with a new strategy. So do you remember when I told you that Robert was so manipulative, he was able to convince women to keep seeing him even after they moved states away? So Robert was given federal charges for SA trafficking because he would pursue women to cross state lines with the motive of SAing them. In 2023, he finally went to trial, and victims were given the opportunity to tell their story, and they told the jury what happened to them in graphic detail. And Robert Haddon was found guilty on all charges and was given 20 years in prison for each charge. There was a criminal investigation against Columbia for covering up what Robert did for decades, and eventually they settled with over 200 of Robert's victims for a total of $230 million. Over 300 victims of Robert have already come forward, but it's believed that there's hundreds of more victims out there, if not thousands. Reportedly, Robert Haddon would see thousands of victims every single year, and he got away with what he did to women for over 20 years, meaning there's potentially over 20,000 victims out there. They call Chris Coleman the Chris Watts before Chris Watts. He was the bodyguard for a very famous TV Christian preacher when he started getting threats that someone was going to kill his entire family. Chris Coleman grew up in a very religious household. His parents were actually both pastors. Chris was always a high achiever and his parents expected great big things from him. So in his early 20s, when Chris met and started dating Sherry, his parents did not approve. They did not like her. She wasn't who they expected their precious son to end up with. But that did not matter because Sherry was already pregnant. And very shortly after giving birth to their first son, they got pregnant with their second son. Chris previously had a career in the Marines, but now that he was a family man, he wanted a more stable career. So Chris took a job as a bodyguard for the very, very famous TV Christian speaker Joyce Myers. Now this is really, really crazy because growing up, my mom used to watch Joyce Myers like every single day. Joyce Myers is a very, very famous Christian TV speaker who would sell out tours all across the entire country. And although Chris wanted a career change because he wanted a more stable life and to be a family man, now he's traveling even more because he's the bodyguard for this person who's doing sold out shows all across the country all the time. And the perfect life that Chris and Sherry built began to crumble. Chris was always traveling, he was never home, so his wife Sherry is upset. And then when he was actually home, Chris would expect certain things from his wife Sherry, but Sherry's unhappy with her husband, so she's not in the mood. So Chris felt that his wife wasn't performing her wifely duties, so he started looking for it elsewhere. And then starting in November of 2008, something started happening that caused the Coleman family a lot of stress. Chris began receiving threatening, hateful emails threatening the lives of his entire family. So the sender of these emails supposedly hated Christianity, hated Joyce Myers, wanted Joyce Myers to stop spreading the word of Christianity, and if she didn't, they would kill Chris's entire family. So obviously these emails are strange for multiple reasons. If they hate Joyce Myers, why are they threatening the lives of her bodyguard's family? It's a little strange. The emails were literally coming from an email address that was destroychris@blah-blah-blah.com. Destroy Chris. It's a little on the nose. But the emails really freaked out Sherry, Chris's wife, and then it got even worse because Sherry found one of these threats in their mailbox, meaning that this person knows where they lived. So they reported it to the police. And it just so happened that one of the detectives actually lived on like the exact same street as Chris and Sherry. So he agreed to kind of keep an eye on things, but he also pointed one of the security cameras that he had installed for his home. He pointed it at the home of Chris and Sherry just to make sure. And then on the morning of May 5th, 2009, that detective got a call from the very frantic Chris Coleman. Chris told the detective that he was at the gym and he was trying to call his wife and his wife wasn't answering, so he asked the detective to go over to his house to make sure his entire family was okay. Inside the home, he found the bodies of Sherry and her 11 and 9-year-old sons, Garrett and Gavin. They had all been found in their beds and had all been strangled. There were disturbing messages spray painted all over the walls. Some of them read, "F you, I'm always watching." Some of them read, "You have paid." When they told Chris that his entire family was dead, murdered, he seemed oddly calm. Chris had an alibi. He claimed that when he left for the gym that morning, his entire family was alive. But it was later determined that his family's time of death was actually at 3 a.m., which made Chris's alibi completely impossible. Chris also had scratches all down his arms that he claimed he got, get this, from punching a pillow. Because I guess pillows have nails and fight back now. Chris was not arrested at first for the murder of his family, although he was the prime suspect. They just wanted some more evidence before they made the arrest, and boy, did they get that evidence. So obviously Chris's theory about what happened to his family was that the person that was sending him those threatening emails was responsible for killing his family. Remember, that detective pointed a security camera at his house, and that security camera found no one coming or leaving the day that his family died, except, of course, for Chris. And I'm sure it doesn't come as a shock to hear that the email that was sending Chris threatening emails came from Chris's computer's IP address. Chris had been sending himself threats for months. But why? Why would Chris want his family dead? What was the motive? Well, Chris Coleman was having an affair. He was having an affair with his wife Sherry's best friend since high school, Tara. And it wasn't just hookups, it was serious. They were already saying "I love you" and were planning a wedding of their own. Chris had already gotten Tara a ring and they already had a date set for their wedding. And while Chris was attending the funeral for his wife Sherry and his 11 and 9-year-old sons, Chris was texting his mistress Tara the entire time. And the theory was that Chris wanted to be with Tara instead, but since he worked for a religious public figure, he thought that if he got divorced, he would get fired. There has been a lot of speculation over the years that Tara knew what Chris was planning to do to his entire family, but there hasn't ever been any concrete evidence of that. And if you're somehow not already 100% sure of Chris's guilt, they found his DNA under his wife Sherry's fingernails. He did not get those scratches on his arm from fighting a pillow, but from Sherry fighting for her life. Chris was arrested and his mistress Tara showed up every single day for the trial wearing the ring that he gave her. He was found guilty on all 3 charges and was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole, but to this day, he still maintains his innocence. He claims that he was framed and that the person that was sending him those emails killed his entire family and they hacked his computer to frame him for his family's murder. And Chris's parents, who always saw their son Chris as this precious being who could never do anything wrong, stuck by their son. They don't think that he is guilty. Even when faced with all this evidence, they wouldn't even admit that he was having an affair until there was concrete proof and he admitted to it. And they really blame Sherry for what happened to her and her sons because they are also really shitty people. But that's just my opinion. If you watched it in this video, thank you so much. And I will see you guys next time in my next video.
Don't hate me, but I seem to disagree with a lot of people on the Gabby Petito case. So after watching the Netflix Gabby Petito documentary, I feel like I had a lot to say about it and I posted a video about my opinions. I've since watched the Channel 5 documentary and I feel like my opinions have changed again. Firstly, I think it's very easy to victim blame in this situation and say things like, well, why did she go away with him when she knew he was controlling? But the nature of abusers is they pull the wool over people's eyes and they manipulate them. I thought it was fascinating that Gabby's own mum said that she didn't see any red flags. And this is so common with guys like Brian. They put on a mask around other people, you know, they pretend to be polite and charming, and really secretly, they're completely different behind closed doors. So I'd originally said that I felt like the police officers that dealt with Brian and Gabby at the side of the road were kind of naive and got gaslit by Brian. I do still kind of stand by that, but I feel like watching the footage on the Channel 5 documentary kind of made me change my mind a little bit. The officer literally directly said to Gabby, did you get hit in the face? It kind of looks like you got hit in the face. Now this is obviously acknowledging the original 911 call where a witness had said that he'd seen the gentleman slapping the girl. Now the police officer in this body cam footage on the Channel 5 documentary also interestingly acknowledged that there had been 2 witnesses to this. I'm not sure whether that was 2 people on one phone call or whether that was 2 individual call-ins. Now remember, the call said that the male was slapping the girl and then chased her down the road and hit her again. That's not the narrative that Brian was pushing in the body cam footage. He was kind of acting like he was just trying to diffuse the situation and push her off. The video shows Brian outright lying, and he tries to change the narrative and paint himself as this hero, which is exactly what he did in his death. I also found it really shocking that even after knowing that he then murdered her, people in my comments were still saying, oh yeah, but it kind of showed that Gabby was an abuser too. Isn't this just such a powerful illustration of Brian's manipulation? That people, even knowing that Brian goes on to murder her, still feel like she is somehow to blame. Secondly, I don't think reactive abuse is talked about often enough. Yes, of course, women can be perpetrators of DV. We know this. We know that women can definitely be abusers to men. However, it is way less common just because of the kind of natural power imbalances between males and females. So reactive abuse is basically when a victim's fight or flight starts to kick in after being abused for so long. They have such a high amount of fear and anxiety that they may end up lashing out in kind of retaliation and just almost like a survival instinct. This may explain why Brian actually had marks on him too. In the Channel 5 documentary, Brian's Instagram is also a little bit more explored, which I thought was really interesting. We kind of see a glimpse into his disturbed mind. Now, he was posting loads of really dark drawings that I'm actually not even going to post on here because I don't want them to get taken down. But there were quotes on there, things like, all I could hear in the deep recesses of my mind was do it. I also felt some of his captions were so chilling as well. One of his posts he did to Gabby, he said things like, I die to watch all our memories on repeat and until death do us part.
This is one of the hardest races in the world. The Barkley Marathons is 60 hours through the Frozen Head State Park in Tennessee. It's over 100 miles, most of which is off trail and has an elevation gain of 60,000 feet. It was inspired by the prison escape of James Earl Ray, the man who assassinated Martin Luther King Jr. In the almost 55 hours before he was caught, Ray only managed to cover 8 miles of the terrain. Gary Cantrell thought he could cover at least 100, so he founded the Barkley. Only 40 people are allowed to compete each year. First, they have to track down a secret email address and then submit an essay on why they should be allowed to run the Barkley. And if they're lucky enough to make the cut, it doesn't mean they'll even finish the race. Since it began in 1986, only 17 people have been successful, and that's why.
Imagine spotting somebody hiding a body on Google Maps. It was November 2023 in Tujeco in Spain. Now the area is absolutely tiny. I can't even really call it a town. There's actually reportedly just over 50 people living there. A Cuban national known as JLPO had been chatting romantically with a woman from the area. Seen in some reports, he's reported as being her boyfriend. They're like boyfriend-girlfriend. And I've seen in other areas, it was just that they were talking romantically and getting to know each other. I don't have a name for her, so for the purposes of this story, I'm just going to call her the girlfriend. Now, he decided to take a trip out to see her, but mysteriously vanished. And it was JLPO's cousin that initially raised the alarm. He'd been getting weird texts off him. You know, the kind of text where it just doesn't sound like the actual person that you're speaking to. The wording wasn't really the same, and in one of the text messages, he even said something that was so out of character. He said he was leaving the area with the girlfriend and was going to leave his phone behind so he would be uncontactable. It was like a, oh, you might not hear from me now, so don't worry kind of vibe, but that just didn't sound right for the cousin. He just knew that his family member wouldn't pull a stunt like this, so he called police. And thank God he did, because he just never showed up again. But frustratingly, police could do very little to track him down. That was until this bizarre find on Google Maps in 2024. The images captured appear to show what looks like, to me, a man sort of bending down, leaning over in the boot of his car, wearing a football jacket. As you can see, it kind of looks like a body shape and sized item in what looks like kind of white tarp. Then further along, there were more images of the man taking this sort of mystery package out of the boot of the car and into a wheelbarrow and kind of wheelbarrowing it out. It seemed that for some reason he was trying to move this suspicious object. Now, police, with the help of eyewitnesses, were able to identify this suspect as Manuel Gallardo, a man who was kind of known in the local area for being a bit of a loner but also being a bit sinister. Witnesses came forward to give some information about this man, and some told police that they felt that potentially the victim, JLPO, may have found this man with his girlfriend and a confrontation may have occurred. Police knew that they needed to kind of come up with a cunning plan to try and apprehend this individual, other than the fact that he looks like he's putting something in his boot. They used wires to record a secret conversation between this suspect and the girlfriend in the case, and they ended up, as a result of this, arresting them both. Investigators did manage to locate the victim's torso in a nearby cemetery. However, it wasn't the full body of the victim, and police are still looking for the remaining body parts. And the girlfriend are currently being held prior to their trial.
Yes, this really happened. In 1983, David Seffen was convicted for the murder of 19-year-old Karen Range. He admitted to killing her but insisted he didn't rape her. Yet he was unable to explain why semen had been found inside her body and was given the death penalty. To appeal his sentence, in 2008, his attorneys got the DNA sample tested, and it didn't match David. Instead, it belonged to Kenneth Douglas, who worked at the Hamilton County morgue where Karen's autopsy was performed. And it didn't stop there. During his 16 years at the job, he had assaulted over 100 different female corpses.
One of the most terrifying things to me is when someone vanishes into thin air with absolutely no logical explanation as to what happened to them, especially when they disappear in a short amount of time in an extremely short distance. I am a firm believer that people don't just disappear, but that's what happened to 20-year-old Ryan Stuka, and the circumstances surrounding his disappearance are just really bizarre, so Let's talk about it. Ryan Stuka was just 1 month shy of his 21st birthday when he mysteriously disappeared on February 17th, 2018. He lived in Beaumont, Alberta, where the rest of his family lived. But on December 1st, 2017, he decided to move to Sun Peaks, which is a really tiny ski resort village in British Columbia. He had never left home before, but he was really excited for this move because he was moving with his best friend to go and do one of the things he loved most, which was snowboarding. He and his friend were going to spend the season snowboarding and working as lift operators at the Sun Peaks Village Ski Resort. And although he was a little nervous to leave home, he was really excited. And he was only going to be there for a few months anyway, as he'd go back home to Alberta in the spring. But before he got the chance to go back home, he would disappear, leaving behind no clues. And what exactly happened that winter night has never been explained. So the day before Ryan disappeared, which was Friday, February 16th, he worked the full day and then went to his home in Sun Peaks, which he shared with a few roommates. Later that night, Ryan and a few of his friends/roommates went to a silent disco event that was being hosted at a local pub. And then after, they all went to a house party not far away, located on Burfield Drive. A few hours would go by, everyone was having fun, and then at 2 a.m., one of Ryan's roommates got tired and decided to head home. They all lived just a short walk away from this house party, and it wasn't unusual for them to just walk home. A few minutes later, another one of Ryan's roommates decided to get up and leave the party, also heading home. And this roommate thought Ryan was right behind him. At 2:10 a.m., Ryan was seen standing up, and he was believed to have been putting on his coat and shoes to go home as well. But after this, Ryan vanished. This was the last time he was ever seen alive. He never made it home that night, and when he didn't show up for work the next day, his roommates and friends knew something was horribly wrong. Ryan never missed work, and the fact that he wasn't answering their calls and texts, they just knew something wasn't quite right. They tried looking at security footage and called everyone Ryan knew in the area as well as local hospitals, but nobody knew where Ryan was or what happened to him. It was at this point that his roommates called his parents to let him know that Ryan was missing, and then they reported him missing to the police at 8:47 p.m. His parents lived over 9 hours away, but when they heard Ryan was missing, they packed their bags and immediately took off for Sun Peaks. The Kamloops RCMP launched a massive search for Ryan involving tracking dogs, drones, infrared cameras, snowmobiles, and helicopters. And on top of police searching, Ryan's parents and hundreds of volunteers diligently searched the entire village, but absolutely no trace of Ryan was ever found. It's believed that Ryan left the house party that night and started to walk home, but the biggest question is what happened to him in that short distance? It wasn't unusual for Ryan to go out with his friends and socialize, and since he didn't know the area super well, he never just wandered off without them. So for him to just vanish off the face of the earth like this was scary and overall just very strange. At the beginning of the investigation, police thought maybe he had been drinking at the party and became too intoxicated, maybe passing out somewhere outside, which was obviously very time sensitive, because the night Ryan went missing, the weather dropped to below -14 degrees Fahrenheit and had snowed about 8 inches. So if that was the case, and he did end up passing out somewhere outside, it seemed likely that he was just buried in snow somewhere along the route that he would have taken to get home. But after digging through the snow, and as time passed and all the snow melted, there were still no signs of Ryan. Here we are today, 7 years later, and not one single clue as to what happened to him has ever surfaced. Over the years though, there have been 3 main theories as to what could have happened to him. Theory number 1 is that he did end up getting lost in the woods after leaving the party that night. There is a good possibility that he was intoxicated and ended up getting lost since he wasn't extremely used to the area and died of exposure. But you would think that after all this time that something would have been found by now, like some of his remains or his clothing or any of his personal belongings that he had on him that night. But not even one piece of his clothing was found. One thing that was brought up about this theory is that he could have been attacked by a wild animal after leaving the party. But again, there was no evidence left behind of anything, let alone an animal attack. You'd think that if he was attacked by an animal that some blood would be left behind, or drag marks, or even ripped clothing, but there was absolutely nothing. Another theory is that he was met with foul play to some extent. Some people believe that after leaving the party that night that he could have been a victim of a hit and run, and after googling hit and run cases in Sun Peak, I'm honestly kind of shocked how many there were in the last 10 years, so this does seem like a potential possibility. The theory is that he was hit by a car accidentally, and whoever hit him moved his body elsewhere, either off the mountain or out of Sun Peaks altogether. But again, you'd think that there would be some evidence of this in the area, like tire marks or blood left behind, but there was nothing. The last theory is that something happened to Ryan at the house party that night, either accidentally or on purpose, and it was covered up in some way. Some people suspect that Ryan could have overdosed accidentally in the house, and the people at the party helped cover it up. Other people believe that he could have had his life taken in that house by another person, and although there isn't much known about the house party that night, it was searched. So if something truly did happen there, I'm sure evidence would have been found by now. Kind of adding onto this theory is what a man who was staying at a home near Ryan's house had to say. This man said that on the night Ryan disappeared, he heard a guy who was pretty angry yelling to to get in the effing car. Now, this could be anything. I know when it's super cold out, I hate when people take a long time getting into the car, so this doesn't sound super unusual to me, but it could also mean something more sinister. And then there's what a retired RCMP investigator had to say when investigating Ryan's disappearance. He initially thought that Ryan just accidentally got lost and died of exposure, but then he interviewed one of Ryan's friends, and that interview changed his mind a little bit. The investigator said that this friend was extremely nervous and acting really strange, and although this information was given to authorities, nothing ever came of it. This theory that something happened at the house party and everyone helped cover it up doesn't seem very likely to me, just based on the fact that when you have that many people in on something, someone at some point is going to say something, and 7 years have passed without a word. It is clear though that something bad happened to Ryan, as there's been no activity on his cell phone, social media, or bank accounts since that fateful night. The Kamloops RCMP hasn't ruled out foul play, but they also haven't found anything criminally suspicious, or anything at all for that matter. They also said that there's no evidence that Ryan ever left the Sun Peaks area. So as time passes, Ryan's case is still frozen in time, and with a lack of any evidence, it's left many wondering what really happened to him. There's currently a $25,000 reward for any information leading to Ryan's whereabouts. His family has gone on to make this Facebook page where they continue to post updates and any information about the case. It kind of created this movement where little green dinosaurs with some of Ryan's information attached to it have been placed all around the world. When people see them, they often take pictures of it and post it to the Facebook group. And in a way, it's a way for Ryan to travel all over the world and touch so many people. The green dinosaurs stemmed from Ryan loving dinosaurs as a kid. His mom said that when he was little, they all played a game together where they had to guess the type of dinosaur. In one of his mom's first ever posts on the Facebook page, she said, quote, "Ryan, wherever you are, let's talk about dinosaurs." And that just breaks my heart. The not knowing is literally devastating, and his family just deserves answers. I just can't fathom that one second you're living your life and the next, everything changes. These are some of Ryan's characteristics and what he was last seen wearing. If you have any information about his disappearance, please contact the number on the screen.
America's youngest serial killer was only 13 years old when he nearly got away with murder. On July 27, 1987, in Warwick, Rhode Island, the body of 27-year-old mother of two, Rebecca Spencer, was found brutally attacked in her own home. Her killer didn't even bring his own murder weapon to the scene. He broke into her home while she slept, used one of her own sharp kitchen instruments to brutally attack her 58 times. The case would sadly go cold for 2 years before her killer struck again, taking the lives of 3 more victims. Literally down the street from where Rebecca Spencer lived, like a 2-3 minute walk away, lived single mother Joan Heaton and her 2 young daughters, 10-year-old Jennifer and 7-year-old Melissa. On September 4th, 1989, when no one had heard from any of them for days, Joan's mother and sister went to go check on them, and what they found was a nightmare. All 3 girls had been brutally attacked, and this was committed by someone that was angry, full of rage. They committed this murder with overkill. Once again, the intruder used a sharp kitchen weapon that they found in the home. Joan was attacked 57 times with it. Her 7-year-old daughter, Melissa, was attacked 30 times with it with such force that it actually broke. Like the sharp weapon broke off on her. It was Joan's 10-year-old daughter, Jennifer, that was attacked the worst, with 62 wounds. Despite these 2 crimes being 2 years apart, it didn't take long for the investigators to link them together because they were so similar, and they believed that they were committed by someone who lived in the neighborhood, lived close by. So detectives, deputies, everyone were urged to literally interview everyone from the neighborhood, and that's how the detectives first interviewed 15-year-old Craig Price. The detective that first spoke with Craig actually knew him very well because he was his basketball coach, and the detective noticed that 15-year-old Craig had a deep cut wound on his hand, and he had wrapped a bandage around it. Craig told the detectives a story about how he got the cut on his hand, but they actually confirmed that the story was a lie. They brought him in for questioning again, brought him in for a polygraph, a lie detector test, which he failed. 15-year-old Craig Price was only 13 years old when the first murder was committed. It was said he came from a good family, a good home. He was said to be a sweet, polite, shy, deep child. He played sports. He had a good group of really close friends. So already it's a very different upbringing and childhood than most other child serial killers that we've talked about. But this case did take place several decades ago. It was the 80s, and apparently Craig was one of the only African American children in his very white neighborhood. Craig claimed that since he was a very young child, he was tormented, harassed, attacked by other children, and even other adults. Craig said for the longest time he would just ignore the harassment, the tormenting, the attacks, the violence. He would just let it happen and hope that if he just let it happen, it wouldn't be as bad. Like there was this one time when he was 12 years old, he was riding a bike with some of his friends. This group of older teenagers were in their car and they were harassing him, and they actually tried to run him over with their car. But Craig says as he got older, it got harder and harder to just ignore it, and he got more and more angry. Like there was this one time when he was 13, him and his friends were playing outside, and he said that this older gentleman started harassing him and got in his car and then tried to run Craig over. The guy missed Craig and then just drove off, and Craig and his friends continued playing, but Craig was so angry about this. He just couldn't let go of the anger, and later that night, he was still so mad, he wanted to go get revenge on this older guy. In the middle of the night, he returns back to the house where the man and his car were parked in front of because he wanted to smash up the guy's car. But the car was gone, so he decided to change his plans, and he was gonna break into the house, maybe rob the guy, smash up the guy's stuff, but he broke into the house of 27-year-old Rebecca Spencer. She was just sleeping in her living room, and 13-year-old Craig Price decided to take his anger out on her, this innocent woman, and he just snapped. Full of rage, in a frenzy, Craig went into her kitchen, grabbed a sharp kitchen weapon, and then used it on her 58 times while she slept. She was a 27-year-old single mother of 2 children, but luckily her children were not home that night. They were at their father's house. After Craig went home, he got in the shower, he hid his bloody clothes in the attic, and then he lived the next 2 years like nothing happened. Then Craig claims one day when he was 15 years old, he was riding his bike when he passed Joan Heaton and her 2 young daughters also riding on their bikes, and he noticed that one of her daughters, there was something wrong with one of their bike chains. So Craig offered to help Joan's daughter, but he said that Joan gave him a very dirty look and that him and Joan had a tense, awkward exchange, and he felt that Joan did not like him because of the color of his skin. And then a few days later, Craig said that he was walking through his neighborhood and he actually walked past Joan Heaton's house, and he said that Joan was watching him through her window and was once again giving him this awful, dirty look. It's very possible that maybe Joan Heaton was giving Craig a dirty look, but it's also very possible that she was just looking out her window, maybe like daydreaming. She's just staring off into the distance and she's thinking about all the things that happened to her that week that upset her, and she just had maybe, resting bitch face. We don't know. Regardless, it was enough for 15-year-old Craig to return to her house in the middle of the night and brutally kill her and her daughters. Just a reminder, Joan Heaton was attacked 57 times. Her 7-year-old daughter, Melissa, was attacked 30 times with such force that the sharp kitchen weapons broke off during the attack. And her 10-year-old daughter, Jennifer, was attacked 62 times. And Craig just returned home, he showered, and he hid his bloody clothes and the murder weapons in the shed and in the attic. And after Craig failed that polygraph test, it was actually enough for the investigators to get a search warrant of his home. There they found all of the evidence. 15-year-old Craig was arrested, and he made a full confession in gruesome detail and has reportedly never showed remorse once. Due to Craig's age, he had to be sentenced as a juvenile, and he was given the max sentence, which was apparently only 5 years in a youth center, for brutally killing 4 people, including 2 children. He would be released at only 21 years old, and he would be released with a clean record as well. But that never actually ended up happening. Craig Price has still never been released from prison. Apparently, he's been behaving quite badly behind bars. He's been involved in a lot of violence, a lot of fights, a lot of attacks, and he keeps adding more years to his sentence. Craig Price would have been released years ago with a clean record, no evidence that he had ever committed these 4 brutal murders. But right now, if he stops committing any more crimes and he stops adding any more years to his sentence, Craig Price is projected to be released in 2044. What were your guys' thoughts on this case? Have you ever heard of this case before? Let me know all your opinions in the comment section. Let me know what case you want to see me cover next. And until then, I will see you guys tomorrow with another video.
One thing that will always disturb me to my core is when someone vanishes into thin air, only to be found dead months later, so close to where they went missing. That entire time, they were right there, yet they were mysteriously never found. That's what happened to 19-year-old Tanner Ward in 2017. He left his parents' house telling them that he'd be back in just 30 minutes. He never came home, but 6 months later, his decomposed and partially mummified body was found hanging from a tree just 3 blocks from his parents' home. His feet were missing, and still are to this day. and he was found in an area that had already been previously searched multiple times. Yet police say no foul play is involved. A lot of people question what really happened to Tanner that night, so let's talk about it. On June 7th, 2017, Tanner left his parents' home in Trenton, Missouri. He kissed his girlfriend and newborn baby girl goodbye and told his family that he was going to meet up with a friend named Jeremiah, but that he would be back in 30 minutes. He asked his mom to make him a plate for dinner and took off walking away from the home. This was the last time that Tanner was ever seen alive, and what happened after this has never really been explained. When Tanner failed to return home that night, his family reported him missing to the police, and one of the first things they did was piece together a timeline of his last movements. Tanner and his sister were very close, and she knew all of his friends. But one thing that stood out to her was that she didn't know who Jeremiah was. Trenton is a pretty small town, and it's common for everyone to kind of know each other. So it was strange that she had no idea who this person was. No one in his family, even Tanner's girlfriend, knew who Jeremiah was. So his sister took to social media to find out. She ended up finding who he was and initially went to his house to look for Tanner, but she found nothing. Police issued a search for Tanner, really focusing on the areas surrounding his home, but they also found nothing. It was like he just vanished into thin air. Fast forward a couple of days, and this is when Tanner's sister was going around town and hanging up missing person posters. While she was doing this, she said that Jeremiah walked up to her wearing one of Tanner's shirts, except now it was stained in what looked like maybe a dark liquid or a burn of some sort. At the time, she thought that this was the shirt that Tanner went missing in. It turned out that it wasn't, but this concerned her enough to tell the police about Jeremiah, and when they were notified, they went to search his house and found something incredibly suspicious. Immediately after arriving, the cadaver dogs that the police had brought picked up on a hit on top of a fresh burn pile in the backyard. The dogs hit on this area twice actually, so this led authorities to dig up the area, but the only thing they found were animal bones, none that were human, and again, no trace of Tanner. Authorities were able to locate the shirt that reportedly belonged to Tanner that his sister saw, and it was analyzed, but police never confirmed if the dark liquid was blood, or if it had been burned somehow. Despite the dogs hitting on this area and Jeremiah being the last person Tanner was known to be around, this was the last time he was ever questioned, and it was the last time that his house was ever searched. Over time, there would be multiple searches for Tanner, but there would be no movement in this case until 6 months later. On December 4th, 2017, two kids were walking to school in a wooded area just 3 blocks from Tanner's home when they made a gruesome discovery. As they were walking, they heard a very distinguishable sound, and they noticed something swinging from a tree above them, and when they looked up, they found a severely decomposed body hanging from a tree. So the kids called the police, and when they arrived, they saw the same thing. A severely decomposed body hanging from a 25-foot tree near an abandoned grain elevator. Parts of this person's body were mummified and the feet were completely missing. The body was so decomposed that it took a full day to identify it, but after testing, it was confirmed that the remains belonged to Tanner. Authorities found his shirt, pants, and shoes underneath him. It only took authorities 1 day to state that Tanner's official manner of death was suicide because the only injury on his body that they could find was to his neck. They say that he ended his own life, but this is where things start to get strange. So Tanner's family and people in the community don't believe that he ended his own life, and there are a few reasons why. Police say that his body had been there hanging from that tree the entire time, yet certain evidence suggests otherwise. The high school kids who found Tanner's body had taken that exact path to school almost daily, and they never once saw his body there. And it wasn't just them either. It was a wooded area, but other students also took that same path to school multiple times, and no one saw a dead body hanging there. Furthermore, a woman also said that she walked her son to school, again on that same path, and she's adamant that absolutely nothing was there. This was 11 days before Tanner's body was discovered, and the area is also a well-known spot where people go to walk their dogs. It's just odd to me that not one single person, either on a day-to-day basis or during the multiple searches for Tanner, saw his body hanging there in the 6 months that he was missing. Like I said, the area had already been searched, and it was only 3 blocks away from his parents' home. So it's just odd to me that he wasn't found sooner. Some suggest that the reason he wasn't found sooner is because people don't tend to look up into the trees very often, which I guess is true, but that brings me to another point. It gets really hot and humid in Trenton during the summer months. It's crazy to me that no one smelled a decaying body during that entire time, especially because there were construction crews in the area only about 30 feet away. Police say the wind blew the stench away, which leads me to yet another point. It's also known to get pretty windy in the area, and there were multiple rainstorms during the time that Tanner was missing and supposedly hanging from the tree. In fact, the kids walking by noticed his body because it was was swinging in the wind. I find it hard to believe that nobody saw his body before then, as there were more than likely a handful of extremely windy days where people were walking in the area. This brings me to the mystery surrounding the state of his body. So both of Tanner's feet were missing, and authorities say this is likely due to either the process of decomposition or by wild animals scavenging his remains. Some question whether or not an animal would only take his feet and not the rest of his body. He was found hanging from a tall tree, so I suppose if it was an animal, it would make sense to go for his feet since they are hanging lowest to the ground. Then there's the question of if it's strictly due to being decomposed. Why was it just his feet and no other part of his body? I'm sure there's a logical explanation on why that would happen, medically speaking, but even so, why weren't they found? There's a lot of talk about how the police handled Tanner's case, or really mishandled it. For example, when his remains were found, authorities didn't tape off the area, and multiple people came and went, which compromised the scene. No samples were taken of the soil surrounding Tanner's remains, and there were a lot of tips that weren't ever followed up on. One tip was that a few people in the community were overheard talking about how Tanner was dead and how his body would never be found, well before he was discovered. And there are reportedly videotapes surrounding the situation that could lead to more information that police never looked at. Tanner was known to have struggled a little bit in the past, and not long before he went missing, he pleaded guilty to unlawful use of a weapon stemming from an incident at an apartment building in Trenton. He was placed on 5 years of probation, but after he went missing, police issued a warrant for his arrest, citing that he violated his probation somehow. So while he was actively missing, the police issued a warrant for his arrest, and people think that the reason he wasn't found sooner was because the police just simply didn't care. After Tanner went missing, his friends came forward and said that he occasionally would do drugs, and his mom did know about this, but according to her, he seemed to be doing better and going down the right path. Some believe that when he went to go meet Jeremiah, it was for a drug deal that somehow went wrong, and that would explain why no one in his family knew who Jeremiah was, because he wasn't actually a friend, just someone he possibly bought drugs from. After Tanner's body was found, his family received an anonymous tip that said he had been held somewhere, tortured, stashed in a freezer, and then his body was staged to make it look like a suicide. This is obviously horrific to hear, but I think whoever sent this tip in was just someone who was deranged and twisted, because there were no signs of torture on Tanner's body. 2 separate autopsies were done by 2 different agencies, and they both concluded that Tanner died by suicide. They noted that the way his neck was injured, which was ultimately what killed him, really only happens in hangings, specifically when someone hangs themselves, and it can't really be replicated by another person. They also noted that the indentation on the tree branch suggested that Tanner had been hanging there for a long time, which adds up to him being there for 6 months. But it's still odd to me that no one found him sooner. Trenton police say that there's no evidence that foul play is involved, but Tanner's family disagrees. They say that he would never end his own life like that, and they believe that he was murdered. Tanner was described as a happy person who absolutely loved his girlfriend and new little baby girl. He was just about to propose to his girlfriend too, and he was just making a lot of plans for his future. They believe that there is more to this story, and they just want answers. It's stories like this that really scare me and stick with me for a long time. Like, I just don't get how someone can go missing but be right there the entire time. And even when they're found, there's still so many questions that linger. But it's now been 8 years, and whatever happened to Tanner that summer night remains a mystery.